All righty, I'm not exactly sure when the 10 minutes started, but I'm thinking it's about 10 minutes. Well, it sounds like it's on. Maybe it's not on enough. Is that getting any better? Maybe. May have to get Dave to come back and adjust the volume for me. We are in Judges chapter 8 today. Judges chapter 8 actually starts after the main part of the battle. Yeah. You know, the experts tell us we need to be very careful where we go in this world because there are hazards everywhere, hazards that are not readily evident. So you could find yourself in a dangerous situation when you thought you were in a good spot. Just for instance, there are 56 nations around this world that have landmines still buried on their land. So much so that the countries can't find them all because they're hard to locate anyway. Until somebody steps on one, it blows up. For instance, Angola is estimated there are 20 million landmines in that country buried under the soil waiting to maim and kill. Afghanistan, about 10 million landmines. Cambodia, about 4.5 million. And removing these, locating and removing these is just price prohibitive. There's no way these small countries can do that. So you've kind of got to be careful where you go because there are hidden dangers. It's similar to, though, in this particular case about Gideon. He, at least after this shortly gets started, he's fought the big battle. You know, the Midianites are done in. But now there's internal strife. Now there's infighting amongst the brethren. So hidden dangers. One pastor says, let us be ever watchful after the victory as before the battle, because the devil's going to come at us from a lot of different ways. You know, I said earlier, way back when we first got started in Judges, don't get locked into a sequential kind of thing because these chapters are not necessarily sequential. As a matter of fact, I think one of the ones that occurs at the very end happened before one of the ones or most of the ones at the very beginning because of who it says is the priest at that particular time. But in this particular case, this chapter probably doesn't occur in chronological order. Even though we're going to take it verse by verse, it is likely that the first 3 verses occur somewhere close to the tail end, because the first 3 verses are dealing with something that happens after the battle's over. But we're going to take them in verse order because that's easier to keep up. So the very first thing that it talks about here is a conflict that results between Gideon and the men of Ephraim. And if you remember last week, we talked about Ephraim being sought out when it was time for the mopping up operation. They were not part of the initial battle, but yet when the initial battle had taken place and everybody starts running, of course Gideon put out the word to all the other tribes that it's time to come on and help out with this mopping up operation. One of the reasons that they feel like Ephraim probably wasn't called in the first place is that they were a proud fighting group. They showed up with Ehud. They joined him in chapter 3. They also showed up for Barak in chapter 5. So they liked to fight. And if Gideon had sought them out at the very beginning and they show up and then God starts whittling down the force, you know, Gideon started out with a huge number. And by the time God got done with him, he only had 300 men. Ephraimites might not have taken that too kindly. You called us all the way down here for nothing? Now you're sending us home? Oh, you're calling us chicken? No, that probably wouldn't have worked out real well. Well, the fact of the matter is God didn't want them called in the first place, but he wanted them called later. Well, Gideon at least has a little bit of, thoughtfulness about him, because instead of arguing with the Ephraimites, instead he praises them. He says, no, look what you've done. You've captured these two princes, these two generals, these two leaders. That's far more than the people of my town have done. It's also interesting to me that the Ephraimites, and they're arguing with Gideon, who is from Manasseh. And you know in the tribe situation how that works, right? Who are Ephraim and Manasseh? They're literally brothers, right? But they're also sons of who? Don't you just love this quiz first thing? Like, wait, I'm thinking about lunch, not thinking about this. Ephraim and Manasseh are sons of Joseph. When the land was divvied up, there were actually two sections of land, well, three sections since Manasseh got two, but there were actually two divisions for Joseph. All the others got one section given to them, except Levi. So that just, doesn't quite add up right? So instead, Ephraim and Manasseh are in there that kind of make up the difference. But they're actually brothers, or descendants of brothers. So it's interesting that they would be arguing anyway. But Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. So Gideon is at least into that. Also, in Proverbs 16:32, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty. He who rules his spirit is better than one who takes a city. Gideon has learned to control his anger, control his emotions. These guys are coming in here and they're accusing him, and they're wanting to pick a fight, and Gideon is not going to fight. Instead, he praises them. Behold how good it is and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Psalm 133:1. So he told them that capturing this Oreb and Zeb were greater feats than anything that had been done from his hometown of Abiezer. And peace was restored, and Gideon could get on about his work. Now, like I say, that probably occurs later, but it's recorded first. Don't get wrapped up in that. Because right now, Gideon and his men are still trying to capture those that have taken flight. So Gideon has got his 100 men, and they're heading off in one direction. The other leader's taken his 100 men going in one direction. Another, with his 100 men, they've gone in a different direction. And then they have called in other reinforcements, such as from Ephraim, to help clean up this operation. They started out, the Midianites and the other people from the east started out with about 135,000 men in their army. We're going to find out here in just a little bit that that's been whittled down a lot. So they are scattering now, and they're hunting down this army. Gideon crosses over, I think, the Jordan River. He comes to the city of Succoth, which is in Gad. And he asked them for food and for water for his men. They are weary. They've been fighting a battle. Now they're chasing this enemy. And the men of Succoth said, well, have you got these guys? Said, no, we're pursuing them. We haven't gotten them. We're pursuing them. And said, well, if you're just chasing them, it's probably better that we don't get involved. If we give you food and water, we support your little army, this 100 men, and you and these 100 men. Well, what happens if that group that you're chasing reorganizes and they pounce on you and they take you and then they come back and get us because we helped you out? No, we're going to sit on the sidelines. We're not going to help you out. Well, as I said before, Gideon sometimes uses restraint. Gideon sometimes uses diplomacy, as he did with the Ephraimites. But now he's dealing with not just pride. You know, the Ephraimites, they had some pride about not being called and that kind of thing. But these guys, they're actually in rebellion. They're actually rebelling against God's chosen man, Gideon. They're actually aiding and abetting the enemy. And so Gideon says, well, I got an idea for you. When I come back, after I caught these guys, when I come back, I'm going to take some of the worst briars that there are out here in the fields, and I am going to beat every one of the elders of this city with them. Interesting punishment, right? It's interesting, too, with Gad. Gad did not help out Deborah and Barak, and they did not show up to help Gideon. So while the others from other tribes are risking their lives to help out Israel, the folks from Gad are absolutely doing nothing. And not only that, they're not even willing to help the ones that are doing the fighting. Hospitality is actually a requirement in the East. So in this territory, not just Israel, but everywhere, hospitality is required. It was required in the law. It's required of us as well. And I gave you a bunch of verses that you can look at talking about that. But the best one of all is Jesus in Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 40, where he says what? If somebody's hungry, you feed him. If he's thirsty, you give him something to drink. If he's sick, you go take care of him. If he's in prison, you go visit him. There's some hospitality that's required. So not only were they refusing to help their brothers, but they were also refusing to supply normal hospitality. Well, Gideon then turns to Peniel or Penuel, depending on your translation. He made the same request for them. And they had the same response for him. No, we're not getting involved. He says, well, you know that big old tower that you've got in your city? When I come back through, I'm going to tear it down. You got something to brag about? Well, it's not going to be there when I get done. Since you're not willing to help me, I'm going to come back and do you in. Well, how does the battle play out? Well, in about verses 10 through 12, you find out there that this army of 135,000 has been reduced by 120,000. So there's only 15,000 of them left. Wow. They have killed themselves. You know, if you remember when the torches came on and the trumpets sounded, the jars crashed and all that, this army proceeded to kill each other as they were running away from that place. And then, of course, Gideon's army, his 100, the other 100, they all went out striking these people down too, and the other folks of Israel have come in. Now, altogether, they have eliminated 120,000 of this 135,000 that they started with, which is an amazing feat. Especially, they know, or they should know, and we realize God did it. They didn't do it themselves. So now Gideon finds out where they are, and he and his small crew mount a surprise attack. The leaders of these two leaders that they're actually searching for, they turn tail and run. And so Gideon and his little band of 100 are able to easily rout what group was there. Don't really know how much of that 15,000 was there, but they're able to take them out. And then they also capture these two leaders. So after he has taken on the force that he was going after, and he's captured these leaders, he remembers, I made a threat, I need to carry it out. So he turns and goes back. He finds out that there's a young man, I guess, that has come out of that city. He finds out from him the name of 77 officials of Succoth, the elders of the town. So he gets all their names, and he rounds them up, and he proceeds then, as the scripture says, to teach them a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I've been told that the thorns over there are about like that. I don't know about you, but little bitty thorns bother me. But when you looking at that, that's kind of like a spike. That's the kind of thing that they said was woven into a crown and put on Jesus' head. And Gideon is now using these to whip the elders of this city. And then, of course, once he's done there, he goes to Penuel and he tears down their tower. And not only does he tear down their tower, he also kills a bunch of the men of that city. So Gideon then has actually lived up to his threat. The difference, I think, as I said before, I think the difference in the way he has dealt with Ephraim versus those of Succoth and Penuel is with the Ephraimites, they had hurt feelings, they had hurt pride. He puffs them up, gives them a pat on the back. He kind of sends them in the right direction. The others, they were in rebellion not only against Israel, but also against God, because they refused to help God's anointed. You remember when, this would be later at this point, when Saul is king, and then David has been anointed, and David has opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to take out Saul. But what does he say? I will not raise a hand against the Lord's anointed. Wow. Even though he knows he's been anointed, even though he knows he will be king, he refuses to do anything that would harm Saul because he is the Lord's anointed. Even the one time that he snuck up on him and he cut the hem of his, a chunk off the hem of his garment. You remember that? And David did what? Then he apologized for embarrassing the Lord's anointed. So the difference here, one, they got their pride hurt. The other, out and out rebellion, and it's treated totally different. Theirs was a sin of hardness of heart toward their brethren and treason against the God of heaven. So he uses some discernment. Then the writer deals with Gideon and the two Midianite leaders. He asked them about the men that they had killed at Tabor. Now, as best we know, that's not covered anywhere in Scripture. We don't know about the events of Tabor. But apparently, these two guys were part of a raiding party that killed men at Tabor. And Gideon is asking about him because it turns out they're his brothers. You see, this is not only a deal to get the people that were messing with Israel at this time. This turns out to be a personal vendetta in this case, because Gideon says, those men that you killed at Tabor, those were my brothers by my mother, not a half brother. These were my full brothers. He says, what kind of men were they? And these guys, I guess, were trying to puff him up, trying to make him feel good. Well, they were just like you. They were like princes. And Gideon says, if you had told me that you let them live, I would by all means let you live. But since I know and you know that you killed them, then you must die. And so Gideon then turns to his oldest son and he says, go ahead and kill him. Now this may seem really weird, but back in those days, it was important how you died. Who killed you? It was an honor thing. It was a reputation thing. For me to be killed by the chief of another army, that was a respectful thing. To die in battle, that was a respectful thing. To be killed by a woman, that was horrendous that should happen. We've already encountered that, and we're going to encounter it again later. And Abimelech is worried that a woman's going to kill him. But for a child to kill somebody, especially a warrior, that would be the ultimate of disgrace. So Gideon pointing at his son and saying, you take him out, that would be the ultimate low as far as these guys are concerned. They're not killed by a soldier. They're not killed by a leader. They're not killed in battle. Instead, they're killed by this kid. But the kid, of course, is scared, and likely he hasn't taken a life yet, except maybe in the heat of battle. And so he refuses to draw his sword. Well, these guys are realizing what's happening, and they also realize, I don't want to be killed by a kid. And you can think of it, too, another way. You might think, if a kid tried to kill him, he might not do such a hot job. He might wound him and not kill him right off the bat. He might take 3 or 4 tries to kill him, and that could be long and painful. He needs somebody who knows what they're doing. If I'm going to die, I want to die now, not slowly over the next few hours or the next couple of days. I want to get it over with. And so they then turn to Gideon and say, why don't you kill us? Or are you a child too? Well, now he's been insulted. And he takes up the challenge. He draws his sword and he kills him. Not going to be done in that way. Well, then it's interesting. Gideon goes back home. The people of Israel, now that this battle is done, now that the battle is over, the people of Israel come to him and they say, we want you to be a king. We want you to be our king. Not only that, we want your son to be king after you, your grandson king after him. There's a dynasty for you. Because of what you've done, you've shown yourself to be a great leader. You've unified all of us into a fighting force. We want you to be a leader. And Israel's going to make that claim later that we want to be like all the other nations. They have kings. And they have a standing army. So that would work out good. There's unity under you. There could be a standing army under you. There's no more surprise attacks. Is that a bell? My watch must be. Oh well. Anyway. So there's this unity thing. But Gideon responds with the right deal. He says, there is no way that I'm going to be king. God is king in Israel. And if you remember when Israel is bugging Samuel about a king, and Samuel's getting all bent out of shape, that Israel is rejecting him as being prophet and priest, God tells him, no. They're not rejecting you, Samuel. They're rejecting me from being their king. God thought he was their king, and Gideon apparently thinks God is their king. So he is not going to supplant God. Well, then Gideon makes a request of them. I have a request of you. How about all of you give me some of that gold that you have as spoils from this battle? And they okay, that's fine. So they lay out this blanket, and of course everybody's throwing in some of this gold that they have gotten, plus some other stuff too. He gets over 43 pounds of gold. And it says, not counting ornaments, pendants, purple garments that were worn by the kings or the leaders, nor the chains that were on their camels' necks. So he's gotten all of this stuff together. Gideon's got his retirement plan now. He's a rich man. Some of this, though, some of this gold, he turns around and makes an ephod. And an ephod is an external garment that was worn by the high priest. It was made out of the finest linen, the finest stitching that there was. It had a breastplate on it that had gems, 12 gems, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. It had, in that breastplate, a place for the Urim and Thummim. that were used to cast or examine, or I don't know exactly, I don't think anybody knows exactly what they look like, but it was almost like casting lots, you know. But the high priest had that to inquire of God what they should do in any given situation. So he's made a golden replica of that, and of course that ended up blowing up in everybody's face, because the scripture says Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it. It became a snare not only to Gideon and his family, but to all of Israel. And there in question 11, I gave you a bunch of verses where the Old Testament over and over and over again refers to the bowing down to a foreign god or idolatry as a form of prostitution or playing the harlot. God is trying to use the closest relationship that we have to give us an idea of the relationship that he has with his people. It is like husband and wife. And so when you start bowing down to another god, you're playing around on your spouse. It's prostitution. It's hoary. It is the ultimate of a slap in the face for your spouse. And God uses that as what he is saying is going on in Israel at this time. In verse 28, it says Midian was subdued. Now that does not mean removed. That was the requirement, remember? The requirement is you remove all these foreigners, but it says they were subdued. In other words, they were like slaves, basically, to Israel. That was not what they were supposed to do. It does not say they were destroyed. The first option is you get rid of them. You get them out of here. The second option is they don't leave, you destroy them. Now they pretty much destroyed their army, but now they need to get them out of the country, or they need to destroy them. They didn't. In spite of that, it says, though, during Gideon's lifetime, the land enjoyed 40 years of peace. So the land is not being disturbed by marauders. The land is not being disturbed by war. For 40 years, it enjoyed peace. I have not researched this yet, but I'm told that this is the last mention of rest in the book of Judges. And that's interesting, because we've got a ways to go in Judges. But from here on out, we're talking about the moral decay worsening in the people squandering the mercy of God, and they are suffering the consequences. So it just goes from bad to worse. Gideon now, as I said, he's rich. He's got what he needs for this retirement plan of his. So he goes back to his home, and he has 70 sons of his wives, of his many wives, it says. You've got to be rich to have many wives. He has 70 sons. It doesn't say by how many different wives. It just says many wives. But then it also points out that he had another wife in another town, in Shechem. A half-wife, I guess, is concubine. And Abimelech is the son that he has there. And Abimelech is a neat kind of name. You know, all these Bible names, they have meanings. Abimelech means, my father is a king. And what did Gideon say when they said, we want you to be king? Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And yet he names his son, my father is a king. He lives like a king. He lives like a king. He's got his own harem. He's got at least 70 sons. No telling how many daughters. No telling how many wives. No telling how many concubines, for that matter. This one is mentioned because he's going to show up in the next chapter, where he tries to be king. Actually declares himself to be king. No sooner than Gideon dies, Israel prostitutes itself again with the Baals. They set up Baal-berith, their god. They do not remember the Lord, their God, who had rescued from the hands of their enemies on every side. They failed to show kindness to the family of Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, for all the good things that he had done for them. Baal-berith, that is Baal of the covenant. Now, a God that cannot see, that cannot feel, that cannot move, that cannot do anything, how in the world can you covenant with that? Jehovah is the God of the covenant. He made the covenant with Abraham. He has made the covenant with Moses. He has made the covenant with Israel. And yet they're calling this Baal, Baal of the covenant. And they're prostituting themselves with that. Only the Lord can make and keep a covenant. All righty. We're going to stop there, and we're going to pick up next time with the next chapter of Judges, where we'll talk just a little bit more about this son whose name means my dad was a king. Thank you very much for your attention today. We'll pick up next week.